This is our third fables lesson, and today we're going to start looking at the actual language that's used in these fables, the way the sentences are put together, and the type of language and words that they need. Now, we're going to start by looking at words that are to do with time. Now, there's two main types of word in a sentence that tell us when something happens. They're adverbs and prepositions. Now, strictly speaking, a preposition is something which has got a noun after it, but it does something very similar to an adverb. If you think back to the lessons that we did in the classroom where we took, I think it was Alyssa, wasn't it? We put her on top of a chair and under a chair and in a chair and through a chair and behind a chair and after a chair and all those sorts of things. Prepositions do the same thing with time. So you can do something, you can take a noun like breakfast and you can say before breakfast, after breakfast, during breakfast, those types of things. So prepositions can tell us about time and so can adverbs. For the sake of you, the function of the two, they're almost identical. So I'm not going to worry too much. You just need to know that you need to have time language in. If you're putting time language in, you are using adverbs and you are using prepositions, and that's all we need to worry about at the moment. So we need a new story. Today we're going to look at the town mouse and the country mouse. Now, like all of these sorts of fables, these stories have been written and rewritten all over time, many times. This is one of the shorter versions. We'll read this one. Then we'll read a later version by a Scottish poet, and then we will write our own more modern version of it using time language. So, the town mouse and the country mouse. Now you must know that a town mouse, once upon a time, went on a visit to his cousin in the country. He was rough and ready, this cousin, but he loved his town friend and made him heartily welcome. Beans and bacon and cheese and bread were all that he had to offer, but he offered them freely. The town mouse rather turned up his long nose at this country fare and said, "I cannot understand, cousin. How can you put up with such poor food as this? But of course you cannot expect anything better in the country. Come with me and I will show you how to live. When you've been in a town a week, you'll wonder how you could have stood a country life." No sooner had this done than the two mice set off for town and arrived in the country mouse's residence late at night. "You will want some refreshment after a long journey," said the polite town mouse, and took his friend to a grand dining room. There they found the remains of a fine feast, and soon the two mice were eating up jellies and cakes and all that was nice. Suddenly they heard growling and barking. "What is that?" said the country mouse. "It's only the dogs of the house," answered the other. "Only?" said the country mouse. "I do not like that music at my dinner." Just at that moment the door flew open, and in came two huge mastiffs, and the two mice had to scamper down and run off. "Good-bye, cousin," said the country mouse. "What, going so soon?" said the other. "Yes," he replied, "better beans and bacon in peace than cakes and ale in fear." Now the core of this story is that there are two mice. One is a poorer mouse that lives in the country, and one's a richer mouse that lives in the city. Rich is a weird word to use with a mouse. Neither of them own anything. One lives in his nest in the country, and he's gathered together the sorts of food that he can find in the wild. Nuts and berries, and somehow he's managed to get some bacon and things like that. But this is fables and they're animals that do human things, so that's fine. The other one lives in a house in the city, or in the town. He lives in a human's house, but we don't really see the human because it's a fable. And the human leaves behind lots of food which that mouse eats, so he eats much better food than the town mouse, than the country mouse. In fact, he lives in a better house. The little corners and mass holes that he lives in the house, in the townhouse, are much better than the nest that the country mouse has to live in. Not so breezy and cold. But there's a downside. He might have those good things, but he has to live with a dog as well. So the moral of this story is it better to have wonderful, amazing things, but live somewhere dangerous? Or is it better to have simple things, but be safe? And the country mouse in this decides that he would rather be safe and have simple food than all the riches of life, but dangerous. So that's the story we're going to retell. Now we can see in this there is some time language. We've got no sooner, . Late at night, when you've been in town a week, once upon a time. Any others? Just at the moment, suddenly. Now you'll notice that in this whole story, that's sort of, I don't know, 20 lines long or 20 sentences long about, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, only 6 of these little phrases or words that tell us about time. So we're not expecting your finished piece of work to be every single sentence has one of these adverbial phrases or prepositional phrases in. Some of them will. So here's my version of the story. I've done a story map. So there's the 2 mice. They meet up. They go to the nest of the country mouse. The country mouse gives him plain food. The town mouse gets cross and says it's rubbish. He offers to take him to the town, and they set off for the town. They see the posh townhouse and notice how wonderful it is. They see the posh town food and notice how wonderful it is. They eat lots of it. But then I've drawn a cat because in the version I was reading first it was a cat, not a dog, but it doesn't really matter. An animal comes out and shows how unsafe it is, and then the country mouse runs off home. That's the set out of the story that you're going to be telling. Now, there's a really good version of this on BBC iPlayer. It's a version by Robert Henryson, who was a Scottish poet much, much later than Aesop. This program's a documentary. In the middle of this documentary, from 3 minutes 41 to 3 minutes 46 seconds to 17 minutes 39 seconds, is a cartoon, an animation of the story narrated by Billy Connolly, who's a really good, he's a comedian, but he's also a really good narrator and presenter. Before that and after that's a documentary about Robert Henryson and other things. But if you watch, or if you can watch that bit, you'll see another interesting version of that story. Now the language is very old-fashioned because it's not as old as Aesop, but it's still an old version of this story. But the animation is good, and it's nice to see a different version of it. But adverbs and prepositions. So prepositional phrases, they're a preposition and a noun. So some of the prepositions that are useful are in, at, on, and after. And then we need a word to go after it. So we could say at breakfast, after the weekend, on Tuesday, in the morning. They're all made from a preposition, in, at, on, after, during would be another one that we could have, followed by something, the morning, breakfast, Tuesday, the weekend. They tell us about when something happened by relating it to these other things, the weekend, the morning, breakfast, Tuesday. Or we can use adverbs. Adverbs can just be a word on their own, like now, or then, today, tomorrow, tonight, yesterday, already. Or we can make adverbial phrases, but a lot of the adverbial phrases you'll make will actually be prepositional phrases. So we're going to look at using these words and we're going to put them into our own sentences. So let's just go through these adverbs now, then, today, tomorrow, tonight, yesterday, already, before, early, earlier, eventually, finally, first, formerly, that means before, just, last, late, later, lately, next, previously, recently, since, soon, till, and yet. Don't forget, I also gave you a list of time adverbials in a comment to the last piece of work. So these are more the phrase type ones, although some of them are actually prepositional phrases. But if you can find this document, and I might post it with this one, it might be a bit of extra help. So we're going to go through the story again. We're going to write sentences for each one. So I've done some examples. A town mouse, I'm supposed to say. A town mouse went to visit his cousin in the country. Now, when did he do that? Now, the version that we read was once upon a time, wasn't it? It made it sound very Fairy tale-ish. Fairy tale-ish. I might put one day. One day. Now, because I put it at the beginning of the sentence, I'm going to put a comma. It's a fronted adverbial. A town mouse went to visit his cousin in the country. And that's what I've added. Now, they don't have to go at the beginning. They can go at the end of a sentence. I could have a town mouse went to visit its cousin in the country one day. I could put it at the end. I could put it in the middle. I could put it just before the verb. I could put a town mouse one day went to visit his cousin in the country. I don't think that sounds as good, but it might do in some situations. So it can go at the beginning. It could go before the verb. Or even just after the verb. Or it can go at the end of the sentence. I think the best place is at the beginning and the end, but it depends on the sentence. Let's look at our second sentence. The country mouse took his cousin to his nest. I can't say something like on Tuesday or at 4:33 p.m. because fables aren't that specific, shall we say. Let's have a look at these. Then the country mouse took his cousin to his nest. Then the country mouse took his cousin into his nest. That could be the country mouse then took his cousin into his nest if you wanted to put the adverb in that space. It could go at the end. The country mouse took his cousin into his nest then. I don't think that sounds as good. What other ones could I use? I could use next. I could say soon. Soon the country mouse took his cousin into his... I could put after something. What could they do first? They could say hello. So I could say after saying hello, comma, because it's a fronted adverbial, prepositional, the country mouse took his cousin into his nest. Again, I could put that at the end. The country mouse took his cousin into his nest after saying hello. The country mouse, after saying hello, took his cousin into his nest. So there are different places you could put these. My last example, the town mouse decided he really did not like the country mouse's food. I could say later, the town mouse decided he really did not like the country mouse's food. I could say finally, but that's more for the end of the story, I think. Soon the country mouse decided soon the town mouse decided he really did not like the country mouse's food. I could put after something, after eating it. I could have at something, I could have at once. Which one do I like the sound of best? I'm going to go for soon. Soon. Town mouse decided he really did not like the country mouse's food. Again, that soon could come at the end. It could come before the verb. So I could put the town mouse soon decided he really did not like the country mouse's food. The town mouse decided he really did not like the country mouse's food soon. I don't think it sounds good at the end. Weirdly, That one almost sounds better. There. The town mouse soon decided he really did not like the country mouse's food. I'm tempted by that. I'm tempted to move that and pop it there. See, everything you write, the first thing you write is not always the best. So, you're going to do that. You're going to look at the story. You're going to write at least one sentence for each picture. You might need more than one sentence to describe each stage of it. Some of those sentences will have this time language in it. Not all of them, but some of them will. So, you're going to write a short version of the story of the two mice. This does not have to be long. It does not have to be complicated. It does not have to have lots of other detail in it. You don't describe what the mouse looks like in lots of detail. It's a fable. They're short. Use my story map if you need it. Just look at that page and just use that. In fact, I'll try and give you, let's take a screenshot of that so that we've got a copy of that I can send to you as well. Some sentences, and notice I've said some, need to have an adverb or prepositional to tell us when the events happen. Could you please, I haven't written it here, underline or use a coloured pencil or pen? Could you do something to show me that you know where those time phrases are? If it's a phrase you put in because it tells me when something's happening, before lunch, afternoon, next, finally, whatever it is, can you underline it or do it in a different colour so I know that that was in there on purpose? It wasn't just kind of a fluke. Do not do it for every line. If every single line says next he did this and then he did this, after that he did this, soon he did this, the next morning he did this, then it gets weird, really weird. So not every line, but some of them. I think between 10 and 20 sentences. 10 sentences is basically one sentence per picture. 20 sentences is about as long as the one at the original. Please don't make it like 2-page long because that's not a fable. It's not what we're aiming for. And you don't have to copy the style of the old one. Like that Henryson chap did a version that fitted with his time and his language, we're doing one that fits with now and our language. It just has to feature the same basic story. Two mice, one in the town, one in the country. The town's lovely and wonderful with exciting food, but dangerous. The country's boring, but safe. So, be very interested to see your work. Any questions, as always, just ask.